So what is a bridle joint? Well, it's basically kind of like a mortise and tenon, except for it is open on two sides. Whereas a tenon, mortise and tenon is generally capturing the tenon on all four sides of the tenon. If it's a through tenon, it doesn't capture on this side, but most standard tenons will capture all five sides. Whereas a bridle joint only captures three sides, so usually the two broad sides and one edge, and making it fairly easy to slide together. In all strength and honesty, this is just about as strong as a mortise and tenon because your glue surface is long grain to long grain and a very solid, large amount of surface, and generally the wood will break before the joint breaks. And so this is a very solid joint. It's also a very quick and simple joint to cut because you're not having to use a chisel to dig in deep into a socket. You can just use a saw to cut down the cheeks on either side of the bridle joint. Now, I've already shown how to make the tenon, and that is in my previous video. You can see that in the links. And today we want to work on, okay, how do you cut the bridle joint? So let's take a look at what we have here. First, I have the actual tenon, and I need to joint it into here. And what we need to actually do is create a stop line here where the tenon goes down to, and then create two lines that go all the way up around to another stop line on this side. So first, let's create a stop line. Now what I end up doing is taking a marking gauge and setting it to the thickness of the board. So the board that we'll be going into, and that way I know how far down to make that mark. And so I can set this on there and make that mark. And then I will put it on here and I'll make a little bit of a tick mark here, and then a little bit of a tick mark here. So those give me my stop points on either side. Now I need to make the two matching lines to come all the way up and around. So to make those two lines on either side of the cheek here, I like to use a mortising gauge. Unlike a standard gauge that just has 1 point, a mortising gauge has 2 points. And you can set those 2 points closer together a certain distance away from the fence. This is with the standard with the points for scratching, but I really like this one from Veritas that has these two rolling wheels. Makes it very nice, you know, one side is accurate, and it's just a really nice setup. I really like this one. And so I can set this up to then make those lines all the way around. And just like with the tenon, I always have my marking on one side of the board, so I know that's the side of reference. So I always put the fence on that side of the board, and I will go around it. So now we can make our marks. Once I have these actually set to where I want, because I'm going to be doing a whole bunch of these, I have like 40 some bridle joints to make. I'm going to make sure that this is really nice and tight. I don't want it to be sliding. This setup is actually really good. As long as I don't drop it on its end, it will stay very well. So I keep it referenced off the mark side. I find my stop, which is over here, along into the board, and I will slide one side, and then I will do the other mark. I could keep both marks on there and go across it. I just find it easier to look at one and then the other. So just like with the tenon, I will mark all the way around the board on all three sides. Now, just like with the tenon, I'm going to show you the opposite side. So on the tenon, I showed you looking at it from this side, so you can see how I pinch the board, and then I let the saw slide along my fingertips. I let my saw slide on the fingertips so that you can pinching the board allows you to easily push the saw one way or the other by either pushing harder, it pushes away from your finger, or pushing less, it pulls it back. And so it gives you a fine adjustment. I'm going to do the exact same thing, but this side, I'm going to make sure I stay on the inside of the line this time, whereas with the tenon, I stayed on the outside of the line. Once I've worked all the way across, I can look at where I am and see what adjustments I need to make and make them while I have them. And on this case, I actually started a little bit askew. I let this saw drift a little bit too far away from the line, which isn't a huge problem. I can always pair that out with a chisel, but I want to get as close to the line as I can. And so I can actually just work on that very tip and clean out a little bit more until I get closer to my mark. Then slowly bring the heel back. And then once I'm down about 1/4 inch, I want to check both sides and just make sure I'm on track. And I am on track. So at this point, if you notice that you are off track, you can't actually turn the saw, whether you lean it one way or the other. Basically what you're doing is, if you're getting too far away from the line, you can lean it this way so that your saw is aiming back towards the line. And if you're going the other way, you can lean it the other way. I'm exaggerating how much I would be turning it. It doesn't take much to move the saw one direction or the other. Now that only works a certain distance into the saw cut. If you go in more than 1/2 inch, your saw is pretty much locked in the groove and it's not going to be moving too much. It's going to track right along its lane if the saw is set up right. So that's why I usually go in about 1/8 of an inch or 1/4 inch and check, and at that point I can make the change. I can't make it a little later. So let's finish this up. Now, some people when cutting down like to cut all the way down on one side and then flip it over. And that way you're always working on the side that you see the mark and cut down on the other side. And so I don't have any problem with that. It just takes a little bit more time because you have to flip the saw over and change it up a little bit. But if you're having a problem with accuracy, that might be a quick and easy solution. Then once you've sawed down both sides, you just come in and remove what was in the middle. Down to that mark, a little more on the other side. And there's that cheek. So we're all set to go. And that actually stayed pretty close to the line, so I might not have to pair that one at all. We'll see. To start the cut, I always like to start on the push stroke. There's something about starting on the back stroke that just drives me bonkers, and I don't really know why. And what that just basically means is that I'm actually holding the saw very, very loosely, so it could be very easily pulled out of my hand. And I'm also using this bottom horn. So basically all the weight of the saw is resting on my finger, on my middle finger here, and on the horn back here. And so the whole thing is just basically sitting on that horn. So when I need to take less pressure off of the saw, I will actually put more pressure back on this horn and just lift up a little bit. And so I feel like almost all the weight is back here on my wrist. So I start with a very, very light touch and follow it back along the saw. And on this one, I'm a little ways away from the line. And this side, I'm a little ways away from the line. Now, I'm going to intentionally try and keep it away from the line all the way down so that I can show you how to clean that joint out. But usually, once you've done it a few times, you'll find that you can go right to the line without any problem. So once we're down about 1/4 inch, I'm going to check about the same distance away from the line on both sides. And this time I'm going to show you how to just do it all from one side as opposed to doing it and flipping it over. Perfect. Just do one more on the other side. There we go, right down to the line on both sides. So that's why if your saw is tuned up well, it will track nicely and you probably don't have to flip it over to keep a straight cut. So now we have two cuts all the way down to our line, and you can see them fairly clearly in here. Now we need to remove this waste. There are a bunch of different ways of doing it. I have seen people do it with a coping saw, but going through this 2 inches of stock, that might not be as easy as it sounds. I honestly just like to take a chisel and knock it out. So let me show you how I do that. So now let's remove this waste. And I start with a 1/4 inch chisel. I like to make it a little thinner than the chisel I'm going to be using to cut out a mortise. So this groove is actually slightly wider than a 1/4 inch, 3 millimeter, or I think it is, or something like that. But then I'll be using my joiner's mallet, and I'll put this not into the marking gauge line, just back a little ways, and give it a good tap. And I want to make sure that the chisel itself doesn't drift back into that marking gauge line. And then I'm going to move it over here, and you'll notice it just popped up that little chip. I can pull that out, go back into the slot I was just in. Move back over here, take out a little more. And if you're only cutting through an inch or so, you could probably do this from one side, do it from the other side, and meet in the middle. The problem comes when it gets down in there, and it's a problem to wiggle around in there. So what I'll do is actually clamp this to the table. One of these days I want to get a hold fast, but I don't have one yet, and so you can actually just use a simple clamp. So now I can just tap in from this end, pop that piece out, and go at it again. And basically all I'm going to do is do this down halfway, then flip the board over and get the other half out. And it really only takes a minute or so to accomplish that. So the clamp I had just broke on me, and so I had to get this bar clamp in here. So the clamp I had just broke on me, so I just got this bar clamp in here to hold it down. I've got to do a video soon on making clamps, but haven't yet. So we continue on. And if you really want to get aggressive, you can just chip out a whole bunch of this and then break them all out. I like going back and forth. To each their own, though. To each their own. I think it's about time to flip it over. Ooh, there's a knot. Flip it over. Clamp it back down. So just like on the other side, I'm going to put it a little ways away from the line, start it, nibble out, You might hear my kids playing in the other room. They're having a ball all the time. One of the reasons I enjoy being a stay-at-home dad, or a work-from-home dad, is I get to spend time with them. Even when they don't want to be in the shop with Daddy. Oh, there we go. So once I've removed the majority of the waste, I will put this into that marking gauge line, keeping the chisel perfectly vertical, and clean it all the way out. So how exactly do you go about cleaning this out? You notice I'm a little ways away from my line on this side, and that was done so I can show you how to clean this back. Also, you'll see some little bit of detritus in the bottom. I'll show you how to clean that out. So this is paring out basically as if you had a tenon. It's just the tenon happens to be inside, so it's a little harder to get to. So I don't want to start right on my marking gauge. I come in a little ways and just clean out. Short stabbing motions. I don't want to go all the way through and poke out the other side because I might blister off wood. And once I get this somewhat close, then I want to actually come down at a 45-degree angle and pare in to that marking gauge line. Just like that. Ooh, gotta go a little bit more. And then I'll come back down here and clean out behind that. And then to clean out the bottom, I'll bring back in this chisel and clean this out. And just like with the tenon, be very careful when you pull it back that you don't then slice your finger forward. These things are deadly sharp, or at least they should be. So the other side is the exact same thing. I will start on the inside here. Stabbing motions. If the chisel is sharp, you're not going to need any mallet. And then I will come in and pare out to the line. Now comes the fun part of testing it. So you've cleaned this out, you think you're good, and now you want to put this into it. And until you get the hang of doing it, chances are this isn't going to be perfect. So don't be afraid to come back and clean it up. So we can slide this in there and everything's looking great, and then suddenly it starts to jam. Not too far away. So my first temptation is to take a mallet and just pound this down in. The problem is with the bridle joint, you could probably pound this all the way down in without a problem. But this top up here is then going to spread out and you're going to end up with these gaps up here. And we don't want that. It's actually better for it to be tight at the top and loose at the bottom than it is tight at the bottom and loose at the top. So we just need to clean out a little bit. And you can test where you need to clean out by then coming in like this. And so you can find out, ooh, I'm going all the way down right there, but I'm not going all the way down right here. So I know I need to clean out here. And if I look at it a little closer, I'll notice that I left a little bit that I wasn't quite all the way back to the marking gauge line here. So I can pare that out. Once I pared down, I can come in with a 1/4 inch and clean that out. So now we can test it again and see. Look at that, nice tight fit. A little bit loose, but with some clamping that will tighten up really nicely. Yeah, that'll be perfect. So you can always test it. If it falls off, then you know it's too loose. If you have to pound it into place, you know it's too tight. But that fits together fairly nicely. And so I'll have this sticking proud just a little bit, be able to clean that up, and then plane this all down nice and smooth. So there you go, a bridle joint. So I hope you like this. It was really a fun joint to do. Bridle joints are a lot quicker and simpler than a mortise and tenon, and they really are just about as strong. And so once you can master this, then a lot of other things become very, very simple. So if you haven't seen the video on cutting a tenon, please go look at that. I'll be doing a video here soon on cutting a mortise, and then probably working my way into a few other interesting little joints and making things a little bit more complex. So if you like this, please hit the like, think about subscribing. Also, feel free to check out one of my other videos. You might find something you like there. I also want to say a huge thank you to all my patrons on Patreon. You guys are really what makes this channel happen. So thank you and keep it up. Until next time, have a wonderful day.